Katerina Jaka watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jaka saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Good evening and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is my good buddy and political collaborator, partner in crime, one might say, Rainer Shea. Hello, Rainer. How are you?
Hello. I've been contemplating the implications of this upcoming election.
Yeah.
And I think it matters because it is pivotal in the process that the United States is undergoing, where there's this rising political tension. And of course, the election isn't going to decide how the material conditions change. Both candidates represent neoliberal austerity and endless war, but for a variety of reasons, this election includes a kind of a really boiling point between these two warring factions of the ruling class. And we have this kleptocratic, corrupt president who has taken advantage of this these conspiracy paranoia on the right, and wants to incite violence from right-wing paramilitaries.
Yeah, exactly. And it's I don't know what's going to happen. I saw Katie Helper. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but I've mentioned her a couple times on the show, but she's got a podcast kind of show like ours. She interviews a lot of real interesting people, but she was being interviewed yesterday by George Galloway on his The Mother of All Talk Shows, Moab, which comes on every Sunday for 3 hours. It's a stupendous show. People should check it out on RT or on Sputnik. It actually comes over. It's actually a Sputnik show, Sputnik Radio. used to be called Sputnik Radio. Did you know this? Sputnik Radio used to be Radio Free Moscow. Yeah, or no, Radio Moscow, I think they just called it. And I used to listen to it on the shortwave many years ago, you know, in the old primitive technologies of the past. But now they're all like on TV, online, and everything. So you can just go to online and find Sputnik News or RT TV, you know, RT.com, I think they're called, or RTAmerica.com, to find it, and it's on every Sunday at 3. It's getting enormous ratings. George he's been doing this show forever, but the last 4 or 5 weeks he's been getting like 1.2, 1.3 million listeners on all the different platforms that he comes on, which for a show of that type is pretty extraordinary. I don't always agree with George Galloway. Met the guy a couple times when he came to DC to give speeches. I think among the people who have been MPs in the British government, of the British Parliament, he is definitely the best, at least the best living, you know. And anyway, he was interviewing Katie Halper, and Katie Halper's saying, well, she thinks that immediately after the election, most of the stuff that they're going to be seeing is going to be legal wrangling, legal fights, kind of like after the Bush 2000, when it ended up in the Supreme Court. I remember going down to the Supreme Court several times with a couple of friends of mine during that time. Huge crowds outside. I mean, confrontational crowds on either side, and you know, people like us who didn't have any side or who were on another side, and definitely not on the Democrat and Republican, on the criminal syndicate side. But yeah, exciting stuff. That's for you young guys. My heart can't take it anymore. Like I said, you can run faster than me, Rainer. But anyway, to start the show, this is, of course, the Revolutionary Socialist Review. October 26th is when we're recording it. You probably won't be seeing it until October 27th, but anyway, so we're in the evening of October 26th. And our first topic tonight, we have a load of a little bit shorter than normal, about 8 topics, but they're all, I think, really stupendous topics. None of them are real super topical, although some of them do have to do with the elections and with the presidencies and so forth. But there hasn't been a lot of real stupendous news this week, so I took this opportunity to heavy load on the front and back ends on theory and on some real meaty Marxist-Leninist kind of stuff. So people be prepared. If you like that, that's good. First topic, NATO 2030. A new low for this international terrorist syndicate. Now, this NATO 2030, it's quite extraordinary. Let me just get up. Let's see. There's an article about it. Came out on August 22nd, and it's on it's on a thing called QUTNY.wordpress.com. Quitnity, is that what they call it? I don't know. It's something new that I'm not familiar with, but they publish kind of like scholarly kind of stuff. The author of this article, NATO 2030, How to Make a Bad Idea Worse. Author Matthew rsr102720. And he starts by saying, I'm going to just read you a little bit of this article because it's really so important. And it shows the direction that the ruling class, all sides of the ruling class, you know, the nationalists like Trump and the internationalists or globalists, as I like to call them, you know, like Biden, and like most of the capitalist ruling class. Although actually, well, most of the capitalist ruling class are either those nationalists or those globalists, and they're the ones that are fighting each other over not Clinton, over Biden versus Trump this year. Anyway, Matthew Errett Kump says, just when you thought the leaders of NATO could not push the limits of insanity any further, something like NATO 2030 is announced. After helping blow up the Middle East, North Africa, dividing the Balkans into zones of war and tension, turning Ukraine upside down using armadas of neo-Nazis, and encircling Russia with a ballistic missile shield, the leaders of this Cold War relic have decided that the best way to deal with instability in the world is more NATO. In a June 8th online event co-sponsored by the Atlantic Council, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced the launch of a planning project to reform NATO called NATO 2030. Stoltenberg told his audience that in order to deal with Russia and China's strategic partnership, which is transforming the global balance of power, we must, quote, we must resist the temptation of national solutions, and we must live up to our values: freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. To do this, we must stay strong militarily, we be more united politically, and take a broader approach globally. In the mind of Stoltenberg, this means expanding NATO's membership into the Pacific with a high priority on the absorption of Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea into NATO's dysfunctional family. It also means extending NATO's jurisdiction beyond a military alliance to include wider political and environmental dimensions. The war on climate is apparently just as serious as the war on terrorism and should thus be incorporated into NATO's operating system. Analyzing China's intentions through the most Hobbesian dark age lens on the market, Stoltenberg stated they are interested heavily in modern military capacities, including missiles that can reach all NATO allied countries. They are coming closer to us in cyberspace. We see them in the Arctic, in Africa, and they are working more and more together with Russia. So you get the drift. You get the drift. China and Russia have consistently bent over backwards begging these NATO criminal rogue countries, including the United States, especially the United States, begging them to create a new world in which nations cooperate on serious international matters. And instead, what we're getting is more militarism, more war. This is obviously a bigger war threat against China, against Russia. Russia and China are already encircled by U.S. and NATO military bases, encircled by nuclear-armed weapons on every side. We've talked in the past about the problems heating up in the Pacific Rim, with the U.S. moving just recently three more aircraft carriers, the U.S. Theodore Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, and U.S. Nimitz into the Pacific, all according to the Defense Department. All will send a strong message, a strong signal, to the Chinese Communist Party that America is deeply committed to defending our interests in the Indo-Pacific. In other words, they're threatening war against China. And they've been doing similar shit. I mean, this article goes on, listing all the crimes of these people. Secretary of State Pompeo is prominent in here. These people have come up with a whole slew, including Trump. Don't make no mistake that Trump is part of this, because he is. These people have come up with a whole slew of new acts of war against China, against Russia, against Iran, and against all of those countries' allies around the world. So, Rainer, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I found out about this article a little while ago, and I've been contemplating its implications with what they mentioned. There are several factors that are clearly being reacted to as NATO makes this plan for expansion and for expansion not just of its territory, but of its ability to influence the internal affairs of these countries. It's reacting to Washington's slipping grip over the Indo-Pacific. We've noticed how we've seen how since Obama's pivot to Asia, China has gained the loyalty of the Philippines, how China has been able to start edging out Washington's military primacy within the Indo-Pacific. And we see how Washington has reacted by getting Australia to expand its military might, and by trying to get India to continue its border dispute and military buildup against China. So it's trying to rally its most loyal allies within the hemisphere towards countering China. Because they lost the Philippines. Duterte has went for militarily aligning with China because China has offered him the best options. So Washington has been seeking to militarize all these imperialist tied satellite states within the hemisphere, with the hope that this will make up for the losses that Washington has already experienced within this Cold War against China. And apparently their next solution is to strengthen their political control over these satellite states. They want to make the NATO not just the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but seemingly the Pacific and Atlantic Treaty Organization. Maybe they'll have to change the name. And yeah. They also want greater political sovereignty over these countries. They really want to make sure that all these countries cooperate, because you see how China has been winning over all these countries to its side economically, purely through the increasing merits of the Chinese aligning with China economically. It's been winning over Italy to the New Silk Road. Thailand, despite being in many ways tied to the U.S., has signed on to the Belt and Road Initiative. And even Brazil in May started trading something to do with cryptocurrency with China, I recall. So they're trying to isolate all their satellite states from China, and perhaps they see NATO 2030 as a way to help ensure this. it's also interesting that they make the war on climate change a big priority in this, because when you think long term, when you think in terms of the resource shortages and refugee crises and all these upheavals and the loss of habitable territory that's going to come from the climate crisis, climate change is, in long term speaking, the biggest threat to the power of the global elites, of the global capitalist class. So apparently these technocrats are increasing their focus on reducing carbon emissions, though there's the innate contradiction that they run into when they try to do this through neoliberal capitalism. I mean, it's pretty absurd how they want to continue neoliberalism in all these countries while trying to fight climate change. I mean,
It
it's
is. Yeah, it definitely is. Okay, next on the list here is the 2020 election, the latest step in the loss of U.S. stability. Rainer Shea, take it away.
In this article, I compare the 2000 election fiasco to the 2020 election fiasco. I read this article from this guy, I don't remember his name, but I quote him in the article, who described how during the Bush-Gore dispute, all these TV networks were making fun of the whole thing. They were drawing attention to how absurd these little disputes were, and the implication within these jokes about the election was that the whole affair was trivial, since there were objectively not really any real differences between Bush and Gore, and since Americans were pretty undecided and a lot of them were apathetic, it made sense that it came down to these minute details that were being hashed out within Florida. They joked because they didn't see the gravity of the situation, and I think that this came from the false sense of security that Americans seem to have gotten throughout the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, and these narratives about there being the end of history, and with increased economic prosperity. From an imperialist capitalist perspective, Clinton was a pretty good president. He made the empire very stable for a number of years. So Americans felt very safe and with the system they had, and it didn't seem like the United States was heading for any kind of collapse. That the next century would be just as strong for America as the last had been. But then, just less than a year after the 2000 election, 9/11 happened, and this happened arguably because of the ineptitude or negligence, to say the least. I mean, you could say more, to say the least, of the Bush administration, and then escalated into this fascistic authoritarianism where they were surveilling everybody, and they started 2 wars, and the wars have gone on since then, and 9/11 provoked these reactionary sentiments that continue to be exploited by Islamophobic politicians like Trump, and there's been all these destabilizing factors and fears and weaknesses within the empire that have appeared since then. So back then, Americans didn't know, when they were seeing the Bush-Gore fiasco, that they were kind of seeing the beginning of the great unraveling for the U.S. empire. Because a lot of them didn't notice these big contradictions within imperialism. They didn't see what was going to happen if inequality kept increasing, and if they kept this imperialist operation where they were antagonizing Wahhabis and creating the potential for violence and for further military buildup. So they didn't know what they were heading towards. Now, 20 years later, after 9/11 and these endless wars and the 2008 crash and the election of Trump and all these escalations towards racial violence that have occurred throughout the Trump years, especially, it's clear to people that this is not something worth laughing about. People don't find it really funny, the lead up towards the big disputes between Trump and Biden. I mean, it's pretty chilling to observe, isn't it? How the attitudes have changed, how the culture has changed.
Yes, it is. It's funny thinking back on that time. You know, I mean, it was kind of a time that impressed upon people's minds for many reasons, but the turn of the century, basically, is always kind of people look new beginnings. Well, this was a new beginning in many ways. I mean, it was a new beginning for Russia. Russia, turned over with a new president who, it's just phenomenal, really, when you think about it. After a decade or almost a decade of Yeltsin, the drunken buffoon, who ran his country into the ground by selling it to the imperialist vampires from the United States and Europe, and the advisors from the United States and Europe gave Yeltsin every piece of idiotic bad advice imaginable, and the result was that Russia was a basket case. People had written it off. Then along comes Putin, who's dedicated to making his country great again. And he did. People in Russia today are bringing home pay 5 times what it was in 1999 when Putin became president. Imagine that. Imagine if you lived in a country where you were bringing home today 5 times what you were bringing home 21 years ago. It's just phenomenal. It's no wonder, Putin's ratings are so high, and they remain pretty high even in these bad times. I mean, Russia's going through some economic difficulties, partially because of U.S. sanctions by Obama and by Trump. We should all recall, Trump has installed hundreds of new sanctions on Russia. Trump is Putin's puppet, right? That's what they say. That's what the idiot liberals say. Give me a break. Fucking liberals don't seem to pay attention to what's going on in the world. But yes, it was a real turning point, a new beginning for America too, as America entered its era of decline. I mean, it had already been in decline, for Christ's sake, since the mid-'70s. I mean, the mid-'70s, during the crisis of capitalism that they faced then, when the inflation rate was actually higher than the profit rate, I mean, that's pretty serious. That means if you're a capitalist, you're not making money, you're losing money every time you invest. So you stop investing. That's pretty serious. That could have spelled the end of the capitalist system globally. It didn't, because the capitalists swung in with neoliberalism, which was a total all-out war on the working class. And we in the working class for the last 40 fucking years have dealt with this war, the single-sided class war on us. But The good side, definitely, since right the time that you're identifying the turn of the century, since then, the decline of the American empire has become more and more and more evident, to the point where it's got all these capitalists real worried, and they're trying to think up, what the hell can we do to stop this, Oh, let's go for, NATO 2030, or let's go for, you know, insane shit. Let's go for more of the same, more neoliberalism, more neoconservatism, more of the same that's gotten us into this mess in reality. But let's go for that because they can't think of anything else to do. Yeah, this really is a watershed 2020 watershed year, watershed election, and the latest step in the loss of U.S. stability. You're exactly right. Now, moving on to topic number 3. Topic number 3 is from assassinations to sanctions. Emergency powers and the rise of the Imperial Presidency. A decades-long push to concentrate power in the Oval Office through emergency response legislation has made the office of president more powerful than ever. Now, I've been talking about this literally for decades now, and very few people hear me. Because most people think, Donald Trump, he's just a puppet of the deep state, or, they come up with these weird ideas like deep state, Obama's just a puppet. He's not. These human beings have more power than this human being, Donald Trump, right now, or Barack Obama before him. They have more power than any other living soul on Earth. They have more power than any other living soul in history, in the entirety of the story of humankind. They have tremendous, tremendous powers. And Donald Trump, lazy as he is, and he is fairly lazy, he's kind of like reminiscent of Eisenhower in that way, out on the golf course all the time. Lazy as he is, he's been making full use of these executive authorities, this concentration of power, what has been called for many years the Imperial Presidency, which I think is the perfect description. Really what this is an emperor. An emperor that is elected by the ruling class, just like the emperor in Rome 2,000 years ago was elected by the ruling class of Rome. The Senate, which represented the richest of the rich back in Rome. They were the ones who basically put most emperors in power. And it's the same story all over again. The Imperial Presidency emerged during FDR's administration. FDR is more guilty, and of course FDR was widely acknowledged to be a dictator. He had a rubber stamp Congress during the entire time of his 4 terms in office, his 4 administrations. He had a rubber stamp Congress that would vote for anything that he asked for. And this
There's no sound.
Sorry, hit the wrong button. I got to stop waving my damn hands. This presidency has gathered unto itself greater and greater powers. It's a great article. It made me think of this because I've been talking about it for years, but I'm talking about it again because there's a great article in Mint Press called From Assassinations to Sanctions, Emergency Powers and the Rise of the Imperial Presidency. This was published on October 21st, 2020 in Mint Press. You can go to mintpressnews.com to find it. It's by Raul Diega, who's a staff writer for Mint Press. And he starts out, he just says, I'll read you a couple lines. On the eve of the 2020 election, no American president has enjoyed more unrestrained power than Donald J. Trump, who has inherited decades of policies and legislation that have given the American head of state the ability to suspend all constitutional rights, habeas corpus, for its own citizens, carry out assassinations, torture prisoners, and impose sanctions on sovereign nations, to name just a few of the 120 discretionary emergency powers the office currently has at its disposal. He goes into, Obama's unilaterally, just on his own decision, dragging us into the war on Libya, which is the first time that's ever happened. He didn't even consult Congress before starting a fucking war against another country. Of course, they don't call it a war. I mean, everybody calls it a war, but legally they don't call it a war because a war must be declared by the Congress, and a war has not been declared by Congress since, June 7th, 1941? The last time a war was declared. And we know that we've been in lots and lots and lots of wars since then. And then there was Trump's decision to assassinate Iranian General Soleimani. Trump used the 2002 Authorization for Use of Military Force, also known as War Powers Act, as his legal justification for that. These emergency powers, it's just incredible. Trump has declared national emergencies 8 times during his presidency. So, yeah, I mean, he's a lazy fuck, but he's been busy too. And each time he declares a national emergency, he can do all kinds of illegal shit. He can violate all of your constitutional rights. The Constitution just goes out the window. He can violate all of your legal, political, human rights even. It's gotten worse and worse because the capitalist ruling class, no, not the deep state, that's absurd. The capitalist ruling class runs the United States, runs the president, has always controlled the elections, has always controlled the government, has always controlled the state, some of which people call the deep state, which is basically the CIA and other spook agencies and the military, and the police forces. Federal police forces especially. The capitalist ruling class runs those. And the capitalist ruling class has decided that it needs an executive that they control, that they choose, that has dictatorial powers. They haven't just come to this decision. They came to this decision back in the early 1940s when FDR was president. That's when they came to this decision that they needed an emperor, that they needed an imperial presidency. And, anyway, I urge people to go to, there's lots of information here. Apparently also Andrew Cockburn in Harper's Magazine, in an article in Harper's Magazine, he's saying here, highlights a little-known set of documents drafted by the Department of Justice of Legal Counsel called Presidential Emergency Action documents, which detail the actions of the presidency is unilaterally entitled to take in the event of a declared emergency. And that's the legal, stuff that they use for this, the legal justification they use for this. So anyway, Rainer, want to move on to the next topic, which is how liberal capitalism has devolved into open tyranny, while I step away for a minute. So take it away.
In this article, I observe, firstly, the rationale that the leaders of the liberal order have for keeping this order in place. In this quote from Henry Kissinger's book from 2014, don't remember the name of his book, but in this book he said that that the job of world leaders is to guard the planet from what he called demonic dictators and demagogues. That's how he described them, like demonic, like there's some flukes within within history that can easily be separated from the civilized liberal leaders of the U.S. NATO empire. So he sees himself as one of the good guys, and he sees the people who he sees the countries which he attacked as the bad guys. So like creating this dichotomy that's convenient for him, where he can paint himself as one of the heroes of history, and he claims that without this liberal order in place, tyranny will rise and war will overtake the world. This is basically his rationale, and the rationale of the others who support this global capitalist imperialist order. But the irony, of course, is liberalism has given rise to some of the most frightening tyrannies in history. You just described how the U.S. Imperial Presidency has taken on a really dictatorial form, especially since 9/11. Another example of the alarming expansions of presidential power that you mentioned. I think another example is the secrecy that Trump has established for the drone wars that the president can wage. After these rules that he's established, the president of the U.S. can wage war through drones with a lot less accountability than he needed to. He needed to experience even during the Obama era. So the president under Trump is now less accountable than ever and more like a dictator than ever. And this has gone along with what I observe in my article, where throughout this last decade, there's been this war on whistleblowers and this effort to censor information that exposes the war crimes of the U.S. NATO empire and the injustices of capitalism. And this war against freedom of expression and free journalism has been in response to the increasingly dire situation that the U.S. NATO empire has found itself in these last 2 decades. After the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan led to the U.S. losing a lot of its global legitimacy, and after the rise of Russia and China throughout the 2000s and onwards led to Washington further losing its geopolitical and economic hegemony. The imperialists felt like they needed to crack down internally. They knew that for the foreseeable future, they would have to continue waging these endless wars to try to preserve their interests. And in order to continue waging these wars, they would have to brutally punish anybody who stepped out of line and tried to expose the war crimes that these wars entailed, which is what the persecution against Bradley, first they were Bradley, now they're Chelsea Manning, the persecution of Chelsea Manning and the persecution of Julian Assange. This is what the war on whistleblowers has been about, punishing these individuals for exposing some of the 2007 war crimes, which was, I think, the Iraq War. And this is then this got extended to persecuting Edward Snowden, who exposed a lot of the frightening censorship policies that had emerged amid this paradigm of endless war. And this war on whistleblowers has extended to many other individuals. It's created a great series of precedents impacting both rogue whistleblowers and ultimately the ordinary journalists who might expose further injustices. And in this last month, we've seen how Julian Assange has continued to be persecuted by the UK and US governments, and how he's continued to be tortured and neglected medically, even during COVID-19. So this is a very alarming series of developments where these whistleblowers have been made examples out of, and the intelligence agencies, in cooperation with the social media and online companies, have been enacting sweeping censorship policies throughout these last 4 years in particular. Who knows how far it'll go?
Yes. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I'll make sure I had this stuff turned off for a sec. Yes, exactly. This has been, to many of us, watching ever since Bill Clinton Bill Clinton with Senator Biden's help, and Senator Biden sponsoring it, created the Clinton Anti-Terrorism Act of 1998, either 96 or 90. I believe it was 98. Ever since then, we've seen the creeping fascism here, and I think that's the perfect big description of this: the creeping fascism coming in America. That Clinton Anti-Terrorism Act, along with Clinton's anti-crime bill, Clinton's crime bill, which put more people, disproportionately black and Chicano, more people in prison than any other country in the world has in prison, more people in prison per capita than any other country has ever had in prison. More people, you'll hear all these ideologue anti-communists talking about the gulags. Well, the so-called gulags never, ever had anywhere near as many people imprisoned in dark ages conditions, I might add, as America has today. This is all part and parcel of the same thing. Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange. These are our international, rock stars of whistleblowing. But they're far from being the only whistleblowers. There's been lots of whistleblowers who have been persecuted, prosecuted, hounded by these government agencies for the last few decades as this creeping fascism got worse and worse and worse, and it's gotten under Donald Trump and even more so under Barack Obama. Anyone who thinks Donald Trump is the greater evil hasn't paid much attention to what fucking Obama did. But I mean, they are equally evil. They are both evil, tremendously evil. And voting for evil is crazy in the first place. I really don't understand how people get this logic that, oh, we'll find this guy who's a little bit less. You know, let's vote for Mussolini. He's not as bad as Hitler, you know? It's a crazy way of thinking. But Americans have been trained by their capitalist-owned bourgeois mass media to think this way, to think in this crazy way. This is like mass insanity. This is not, and I shouldn't say Americans because Americans don't think this way. Only half of the Americans vote. So it's only that half, the crazy half, who think this way and who've been trained to be like monkeys voting for their, the zookeeper with a whip in his hand. Yeah, it's crazy. Well done, Rainer. Next point number 5. Okay, we're making pretty good time here. Don't vote for a psychopath. That's pretty much just what we were just saying, isn't it? Tyranny at the hands of a psychopathic government. Now, this one is another article that comes from Mint Press. I'm really impressed with Mint Press. Ever since you told them, they must have been listening to you, Rainer. Ever since you told them, you know, you guys haven't been updating your site as much, get on the ball. And man, they've really jumped. They've got some great articles coming out. Anyway, this article by John Whitehead. John Whitehead is some kind of a lawyer, a law professor type. I'll read that later on, but it's pretty incredible what he has here. He starts out saying, politicians are more likely, and he cites an article, a scholarly article to this effect. Politicians are more likely than people in general, in the general population, to be psychopaths. I think you would find no expert in the field of sociopathy, psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder who would dispute this. That a small minority of human beings literally have no conscience was and is a bitter pill for our society to swallow. But it does explain a great number of things. Shamelessly deceitful political behavior being one. This is a quote that Whitehead starts out his article as a quote from Dr. Martha Stout, clinical psychologist and former instructor at Harvard Medical School. 20 years ago, a newspaper headline asked the question, what's the difference between a politician and a psychopath? The answer then and now remains the same, none. So he goes on, there is no difference between psychopaths and politicians, nor is there much of a difference between the havoc wreaked on innocent lives, uncaring, unfeeling, selfish, irresponsible, parasitic criminals and elected officials who lie to their constituents, trade political favors for campaign contributions, turn a blind eye to wishes of the electorate, cheat taxpayers out of hard-earned dollars, favor a corporate elite, entrench the military-industrial complex, and spare little thought for the impact of their thoughtless actions and hastily passed legislation might have on defenseless citizens. Psychopaths and politicians have a tendency to be selfish, callous, remorseless, users of others, irresponsible, pathological liars, glib con artists, taking in remorse and shallow, lacking in remorse and shallow. And every one of these statements that he's making have citations to scientific scholarly papers backing up what he's saying. This isn't just the guy's opinion. This is what psychologists and psychiatrists, medical professionals have found in studying. He says charismatic politicians like criminal psychopaths exhibit a failure to accept responsibility for their actions. There's another citation. Have a high sense of self-worth, are chronically unstable, have socially deviant lifestyles, need constant stimulation, have parasitic lifestyles, and possess unrealistic goals. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about Democrats or Republicans. Now, this article, the guy doesn't say Trump and Biden, but anybody who looks at Trump's record over the last 4 to 5 decades, and anyone who looks at Biden's record over the last 4 or 5 decades, if you are not white, if your brain isn't brainwashed by the capitalist media, you will immediately see psychopaths. These are the people who become our presidents. They are deliberately chosen by the capitalist ruling class to be our presidents. The capitalist ruling class wants someone who is criminal, who they know has no qualms about doing the mass murder, the mass criminality that presidents are expected just naturally to do. Drop bombs on innocent babies. Drop bombs like Obama used to do, the Obama double tap. You remember that one? The Obama double tap was he would drop a bomb on a wedding. Now, apparently, he'd have some vague intelligence that one terrorist, one like Al-Qaeda leader or someone like that, or ISIS leader, was in this wedding. The wedding had hundreds of people. So he'd drop a fucking bomb, or a drone would drop a bomb on the entire wedding, killing hundreds of people in some cases. Okay, well, that's bad enough. That's real bad. That's criminal. That's a war crime. Obama, just like Trump, just like every president since and including FDR, they're all war criminals. But to make it worse, Obama would use the double tap. 20 minutes after the first bomb was dropped, the drone would circle back. By then, the fire brigade, the police, the rescue squad, the medical personnel coming to help the wounded, they'd all have come. Then they'd drop another bomb, wipe all those people out too, the first responders. That's Obama. Now, I don't know if Trump has been using the double tap because it hasn't been exposed as much as it was exposed. It was real exposed during Obama, I think mainly because there was a lot more focus on Obama's use of drones. By now, drone use is, like par for the course, so people don't seem to even pay attention to it anymore. So God only knows what kind of crimes, war crimes, Trump is doing. I'm sure they must be just as bad, but I know about the case of Obama. Obama is a gruesome, psychopathic, mass murdering criminal who deserves the electric chair or the guillotine. I prefer the guillotine. I think that'd be a nice touch. That's what Obama deserves. He'd have a fair trial first, of course. We'd provide him with a fair trial and put him on trial for all his fucking crimes against humanity, all his war crimes, Trump too, and all the others. Bill Clinton, who's still alive, George W. Bush, who's still alive. We'd put those four. That's the first order of business after the revolution. Remember that, Rainer, because I might not be around. I might be dead by then, but you'll be around. So remember that. These are gruesome human beings, criminal to the core. Imagine if Hillary Clinton had become president. This woman, when she was Secretary of State, she sat in a room laughing while they had live video feed fed to them by the CIA agents who were there on the scene as Muammar Gaddafi, one of the greatest African leaders ever, Muammar Gaddafi was brutally murdered by terrorists, the Al-Qaeda terrorists that the CIA was paying in Libya, rammed a bayonet up his ass after beating the hell out of him. This despicable subhuman being, Hillary Clinton, as I call her, laughs, and she says, we saw, he died. She laughs like a fucking witch, a maniacal cackle. Now, you tell me that's not a psychopath.
Well, I've been, here's the thing about this kind of mental health oriented rhetoric, because no matter what traits a public figure exhibits, the policy that psychologists take is to not diagnose anybody without formal procedure. And though there are plenty of strong arguments that that could be made, but from a psychological perspective, well, I'd want to refrain from calling anybody with a particular that they have a particular disorder without running them through some kind of psychological test. Though I definitely see where John C. Whitehead and you are coming from, observing how these characteristic, how these stereotypical traits of what are colloquially called psychopaths, people who lack the cognizance to have the regular moral judgments. It's certainly it's certainly common within these leaders who operate these tyrannical capitalist imperialist systems. But I think the problem with this kind of rhetoric is it oversimplifies this mental health topic that needs more nuance, and I don't want to end up stigmatizing people who have not committed any of these types of crimes and you have these types of mental health problems. I've been studying mental health topics like these, and I've heard stories about people who have been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, but whose families end up distrusting them when they hear this news because they hear the words psychopaths and sociopaths, and so they end up writing these family members off and acting like these people, like everything that they say is untrustworthy, or they're innately bad people simply because they have this disorder. And then the terms like psychopath and sociopath, which you might know better since you dug into this article with these links to studies, but I don't know if they're such formal diagnoses. The formal diagnosis that's related to them is antisocial personality disorder, which there's certainly lots of evidence that antisocial personality disorder leads to manipulation and dishonesty. But like I said, there's plenty of nuance to this, and I think that the way to frame these kinds of moral judgments over the people who run these tyrannical systems is the system innately breeds evil behavior. It's and the people who commit these kinds of evil things don't necessarily do them because there's an innate tick in their brain that predisposes them towards evil behavior. They do it because they've made these choices to become complicit in these corrupt systems, and this is important to note because this shows that anybody could become a criminal like this, whether you're diagnosed with personality disorder or not. You could through the wrong choices bred from circumstances, you too could become a monster, which is the kind of conversation that we've had when judging the Nazis. We're like, it's important to recognize that the Nazis were human, because acting like they were not human, it kind of serves to absolve us of potential responsibility that we have, and ignore the our own corruptibility.
Yeah,
So,
that's those are important qualifications there. Great observations, bringing your experience as a student of psychology. Certainly, not every person who's a psychopath or a sociopath does these crimes. That's what we really should be focused on here, is the fact that these human beings, all of them, every president since FDR, including FDR, Saint FDR, all of them have been mass murdering war criminals. Jimmy Carter too. People call him Saint Jimmy, you know. Jimmy Carter is his hands are just as bloody in Angola, for instance, in East Timor, just as bloody as all the rest of them. These people have committed these criminal acts. You are correct, not every person who exhibits some psychopathic or some sociopathic features is going to decide to become a criminal. These people are criminals. It's my personal opinion that it's not just that this behavior is bred by the system. My personal opinion is that the capitalist ruling class vets these people before they ever become president. And they deliberately choose, the capitalist ruling class deliberately chooses this kind of person who already has a criminal record. Trump's got a criminal record going back decades. Biden has a criminal record going back decades. That's why these two were chosen, because they already exhibit this behavior. They already have committed the crimes, you know. So I think it's a deliberate choice by the capitalist ruling class collectively to choose these kinds of people for their two parties, the Democrat and Republican parties, and pretty much all of them. It's astounding to me. You know, I can't think of a person who's been who's been a nominee of either party in decades and decades who wasn't exactly this kind of a criminal, who is already guilty of these criminal acts. But yeah, you are correct. Rainer, and it's good for us to point that out. We don't need to be stigmatizing people because of the criminal acts of politicians. We should stigmatize politicians in the Democrat and Republican Party because pretty much all of them have a natural tendency towards this, and pretty much all of them lean in this direction. But enough said about that. Okay, next. The imperialists could start a third world war. Another topic by our prolific Rainer Shea. Take it away.
Yes, this was prompted by the victory for the socialists in Bolivia, which I'm not sure if you were planning to talk about them when you said that there's not been too much notable news. Maybe I don't know what you were planning, but I think this was pretty notable news because it represented a big step towards the loss for the U.S. imperialists within Bolivia. They're about to lose this territory, and they might stage another coup attempt afterwards. But we'll talk about that another time, and I really doubt that they'll be successful. I think it's clear that they're on their way towards inevitably losing not just Bolivia, but a number of other neo-colonies, perhaps next Chile, Colombia, Haiti, Honduras. The people there are pissed off at these miserable conditions that the imperialists and the IMF have imposed upon them, destroying workers' rights and keeping all these people poor, overexploiting them. So as these anti-imperialist revolutions sweep the globe, and as Russia and China rise, and as China keeps digging into Washington's economic interests by getting more economic allies, and as the U.S. economy keeps contracting, as the empire declines, the imperialists are going to continue reacting with this military buildup, and with these moves towards trying to contain their rivals. As you pointed out, Japan is another country that's being militarized, in addition to all these other U.S. allies, from India to Brazil to Australia. So this means that it seems like within literally all the countries that are in any way on the periphery of the United States, even in even in Iceland, one of the countries that we seem to think about the least when we're talking about geopolitics, there's this trend towards military buildup. And NATO 2030, of course, is another facet to this. There's a quote from Mao that I keep thinking of these days, where he said, when we say imperialism is ferocious, we mean that the imperialists will never become Buddhas. They will never lay down their butcher knives. They'll always make trouble, fail again until they're doomed. This is their nature. And from Iceland to Brazil to India to Australia to Japan, the imperialists are now sharpening their butcher knives through building up their armed forces and through allowing Washington to expand its nuclear arsenal and surround these superpowers, Russia and China, with military bases. So I mean, maybe this is going to be a repeat of the dynamic that led up to the Second World War. World War II started because the imperialists wanted a war, and also partly because this rogue imperialist ally the Germans decided to get too ambitious and start invading all these European powers. So in the 21st century, the equivalent of Nazi Germany is the United States, and the United States is going to keep pushing until something breaks.
Yes. That seems to be the direction things are going. It's quite scary. And it's getting worse. I mean, these people are doubling down. You can see that in many of the things that they're doing these days. They're constant poking at the Chinese Communist Party, for example, and that Chinese Communist Party, by the way, which is the largest political party in the world, largest political party ever in the history of the world, and enjoys something like 80%, according to independent polling by American pollsters. It enjoys something like 80% and more popularity among the Chinese people. So they're doing something right. And that's the bottom line there. Most people don't really understand how China works. They don't understand how China operates. And they certainly don't understand the role of the Chinese Communist Party. It's called the ruling party, but, in fact, China is ruled by a coalition of political parties. It's ruled by a coalition of forces. It would have to be. It's 1.4 billion people, for fuck's sake. No one entity could ever control all that. But it is the guiding hand of China, and people understand that because China, throughout its 2,200-year history, it's 2,200 years of history, has always had a guiding hand like that whenever it had stability. And Chinese people understand that. But the Americans will continue to poke and poke and poke at China, continue to carry out terrorist acts against China, acts of war, war threats like these 3 new aircraft carriers that have just entered the scene in the Pacific. They are doing this all over the world. They are doubling down. They are doubling down on their sanctions regime everywhere. It's just utterly, first of all, it's illegal because according to the United Nations Charter, a sanction cannot be unilaterally imposed by one country unless that country is at war, a declared war. That is, in the instance of the United States, that would be in the United States, U.S. Congress declared war against somebody, which it hasn't done since June 1941. That would be the only way that a single country could legally impose sanctions on another country. The U.S. imposing literally, I think, thousands of sanctions on hundreds of countries around the world is an illegal act in and of itself. It's an act of war in and of itself. And imperialists could start a third world war. Absolutely. And this is one of the greatest fears that I have. It's one of the greatest fears, obviously, that the prestigious atomic Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has, because they've put their doomsday clock up to 100 seconds before midnight, which is the worst it's ever been, including during the so-called Cuban Missile Crisis. Things are getting really bad, and I saw a guy, Sachs, his name, Jeffrey Sachs. He's a liberal. kind of, like a social liberal. A lot of people like him. I don't particularly like him, but I saw him talking about all the different ways that we've come that close to nuclear exchange in the past because things happened that people didn't expect to happen. Mistakes happened, calamities happened, errors in judgment happened. And he was just talking, he made a lot of sense in this case. He doesn't normally make a lot of sense, but in this case, he made a lot of sense. He was in a debate with it was something that an anti-war, international anti-war coalition had put out, this online discussion. I watched it yesterday, and Jeffrey Sachs made a lot of sense that a nuclear exchange, which would wipe out all of human life, wipe out most life on the earth, most complex life anyway, the things that we usually identify like animals, bunnies and birds and stuff. All it would take is a little mistake, and these mistakes have happened far too often in the past to ignore. So just that, and that's not even considering the fact that these are psychopaths, or whatever you want to call them. These are mass murdering criminals who are our president. The current ones certainly in the past have been. The current one's kind of unstable, it seems. So yeah, mistakes can happen. This is a very real threat. Okay. Next on the list, another one by, boy, you're really prolific these days, Rainer. I'm glad of that because you're giving my voice a little bit of a break here. The imperial collapse is making the U.S. vulnerable to revolution. Take it away, buddy.
In this article, I examine the dilemma that those who want a socialist revolution have found themselves in really since the beginning of the United States and throughout the whole history of U.S. imperialism and colonialism. It's because this dilemma is that the majority of the white population has had counter-revolutionary ways of thinking that stem from their place within the settler colonial nation, that stem from their material and more often emotional investment in the continuation of the American identity. They don't want to give up America, and even when they start getting sympathetic towards socialism and class struggle, they still go about with the assumption that they can keep supporting America as a concept, and they think that the United States can become socialist, when really for a revolution to be just, it'll have to be led by a platform that gives autonomy to the colonized peoples, and that gives reparations to the colonized peoples, including through the returning of all the stolen indigenous land. I mean, most white people have always felt uncomfortable with talking about these kinds of contradictions within the country that they live in. And this was reflected when, after the Black Panther Party was dissolved through state repression, it didn't result in a larger growth for the revolutionary socialist movement in America. After the Black Panther Party, the so-called socialist movement in America was pretty much co-opted by the Democratic Party and descended into petty bourgeois reformism, not revolutionary socialism. And this was no surprise, given given where the revolutionary socialist movement had recently been originating from in America. It was originating from Black liberation fighters. I think that the Black Panther Party was the most successful attempt at building a revolutionary vanguard in the history of the United States. And it's no surprise that this effort was made by colonized peoples who were fighting against apartheid conditions at the time. And it's no surprise that the vast majority of white people in this country did not come to join their cause, and that they just went along with this petty bourgeois reformist mindset and got herded into the Democratic Party and an alternative to the Republican Party. So since then, though, the material conditions in the U.S. have greatly changed. A lot of the white population has gotten poorer, along with the colonized population. Of course, the colonized population has gotten even poorer as a consequence. And I think this creates great opportunities for mass radicalization towards revolutionary socialism on this continent. I don't know if the majority of the white population here will ultimately come to share the idea that America needs to be dismantled and that we need to carry out a full-on proletarian revolution rather than continuing with the cycle of petty bourgeois reformism. I don't know if this facet of the population that's so historically tied to this colonial baggage will be able to make this leap, or if they'll most of them will remain complacent or loyal to the racist reaction. But I think ultimately it won't. I don't think the question we should be asking is, will most white people join our side? Because what white people think isn't the say-all, end-all of what will happen on this continent. The more and more people of color are immigrating to this country or being born, and the white population is relatively declining. Apparently, by 2032, the majority of the workers in the U.S. will be non-white. So I think this is encouraging from a revolutionary socialist standpoint, because of course no one ethnic group is politically monolithic, and of course communists should still try to reach out to as many white people as we can, but these trends towards increasing inequality and increasingly severe contradictions of capitalism and towards a shrinking white population, it's making the potential for proletarian revolution on this continent greater than ever before. And I think that after several more stages of collapse and several more stages of building the revolutionary socialist organizations and agitating among the masses, we'll be able to create a vanguard that's capable of taking on the state and carrying out the revolutionary steps that will need to happen in order for this vast injustice called America to be rectified.
Yes, I agree with most of what you said there. That things are looking up. I mean, right now, to tell you the truth, we are lacking in one thing sorely more than anything else, and that is a Leninist political party or a political organization. Doesn't have to be a party. Probably even shouldn't be a party. Shouldn't be called a party, because people in the United States have this predetermined expectation of political parties being electoral, and this should not be an electoral organization. It should be a revolutionary organization, focus on revolution. But I think before we worry about building any kind of mass organization or any kind of largest this or largest that, we need to be focused on building a leadership that can actually lead, or else we're going to see the same thing as we've seen in the last year, eruptions that have good heart, but they don't lead to anywhere really. All that they don't lead in a political or a revolutionary direction because they don't have revolutionary leadership. So that's what I'm more focused on. And who will come to a revolutionary Leninist party? The vanguard of the working class, in my opinion, first and foremost, although not exclusively. There will be middle class people who come to this organization, just as in the past, just as in the Black Panther Party had middle class people come to it, just as the Communist Party and other Socialist Party before that had middle class people come to it. So they will come too. But I think the bulk of the people who come to a vanguard organization will be working class. And you know what? I'm not focused on whether they're white or black or brown or yellow or red. I think there are good people in all those ethnic groups. And these are ethnic groups. There's nothing scientific about calling these ethnic groups races. Race is a social construct. It's not a biological construct. There's nothing, biologically different between a sub-Saharan African and me and you. We're the same people primarily, I'm not real focused on whether they're white or black or. Whites will come because there are Marxist-Leninists among the whites, we know. Native Americans will come because there are Marxist-Leninists among Native Americans who will come. Blacks will come. Blacks have certainly been in the vanguard. Blacks will come, first and foremost. And that's probably why the Black Panthers was as successful as it was, and why the capitalist ruling class became determined to wipe them out. They still haven't quite wiped them out because there's still lots of remnants popping up here and there of the old Panther Party. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that the Panther Party was the most successful. I would say that the Communist Party in the 1940s was the most successful of Marxist-Leninist organizations anyway. Obviously, the Socialist Party in the teens was very successful as well, although the Marxist-Leninist cadre within the Socialist Party was pretty small at that time, and developed only after the Russian Revolution sparked that knowledge that a Leninist party was so important. But other than that, I mean, I agree with you 100%. The imperialists, the capitalist imperialist system is creating the fertile ground for its own demise, and will continue to do so, and cannot help but do so. It cannot help but do everything that one would do if one were hell-bent on creating a revolutionary situation and a revolutionary party and a revolutionary vanguard and a revolutionary working class. That's just that's the way things go. Anyway, anything more on that? Good job, by the way.
Well, I think back to this paragraph from Jay Saki's 1983 book Settlers, which I think was written in reaction to the ongoing complacency of the white proletariat in this country, their lack of willingness to become revolutionary socialists. He said that even though the material conditions within the imperial core will continue to deteriorate as U.S. imperialism irreversibly collapses, he isn't sure that this will necessarily result in all these white working class people rushing to truly revolutionary entity and to a revolutionary program, because he's observed how during the Great Depression and then in the early decades of the 19th century, the white working class endured very brutal conditions, in many ways worse than now, and they overwhelmingly gravitated towards the basic idea that labor struggles should be engaged in, but not in a way that shatters the fundamental structures of empire, not that dismantles the United States, not even necessarily that that dismantles capitalism. And so he I mean, when we get into this subject, it's a subject that requires nuance and that is easy to be argued about on either side, because it's a complex issue. And what I'm saying and what I think Saki was saying was not that there is no white proletariat, not that there is no potential to radicalize the white proletariat, just that we should recognize the huge historical baggage that's tied in with being white in America. And if you're white in America, you have to overcome a myriad of mental blocks that could prevent you from moving past the American identity and submitting yourself to this revolution that addresses the colonial contradictions. So I realize these mental roadblocks that I've had to overcome. I see how unique my situation is as a white guy in America, and I get the sense that by and large, the colonized peoples are more likely to come to revolutionary socialism than whites are.
Well, that's certainly true. We know that from history. The most oppressed sectors have the least to lose and the most to gain. Yeah, I think Sake. I mean, I've read. I still haven't read that whole book. I doubt that I ever will, because I think it's garbage. But from what I have read of quotes from his book, he says very clearly that there's no white proletariat in the United States, which is absurd.
I feel like I gotten a different idea from.
I mean, I'll find the quotes and show you the pages that they're on. But anyway, here's the point I want to make. I don't want to get into that. I want to get into this. I think Sake is misidentifying what was going on in the latter half of the 1930s into the 1940s, vis-a-vis the vanguard of the working class. And like I say, I'm not differentiating in the ethnic groups and the colors of the skin like he seems to be doing. But I will say that that more than half of the people involved in this, more than half of the vanguard, what I would call the vanguard of the working class, were lighter skinned ethnic groups. Euro, just put it that way, the continent Europe, Euro Americans. And those people, they were led by the Communist Party of the United States. They were led to a lesser extent by the Socialist Party, by the Socialist Workers Party, by the Workers Party, by other socialist elements as well. But mainly they were led, by and large, I mean, 9 out of 10 of them were being led by the Communist Party. And what was going on in the Communist Party starting in 1935? Well, Stalin decided to back this idea that was brought up in the Comintern of Popular Front. The Popular Front was this idea that the communist parties around the world would form blocks and lead the working class to form cross-class blocks with the bourgeoisie. That's what was going on. That's how these people were being led. So I think what Sake is seeing and misidentifying, too blind because he was a Maoist, too blind to see that this was the Stalinist Popular Front in action. And, and I won't even comment on the Popular Front in other countries. There were some disasters, there were some successes. In America, the Popular Front led the working class into this idiotic class collaborationist idea of making common cause with the bourgeoisie, with the Democrats, basically. Everything that you said, that Sake said about what the white, quote, white working class, also the black working class was doing this at the same time, and the Chicano working class. The working class was doing this because they were being misled into a popular front. That was the problem there. That's not a problem having to do with the character of the white workers. If that was the case, why did the black workers go along with it, with this class collaboration? They went along with it because their party, which they trusted, their international organization, the Comintern, told them this is what you need to do. Fuck, if you look at the third period communism before that they were involved in, which was, supporting the Black Belt, a black nation in the South, and, it was totally different. Supporting the idea of social fascism. Instead, the Popular Front led to class collaborationist fronts with the liberal parties and with the social democrat parties and other parts of the world. But in the United States, it led to the FDR labor left liberal coalition, which exists today, is the same fucking coalition that brings in the labor movement, that brings in the radical left, including most communist organizations in the United States. They all still do it today. That's not just what they did in the 1930s, it's what they do right fucking now.
No wonder.
This is a major fucking problem. The Popular Front. Now, to blame that on some weird, concept of the character of white people, it's just fucking racist, number one. I mean, that's probably the wrong word. It's a bigotry. It's a kind of bigotry. It's a stupid prejudice. It's just ridiculous. What white workers did, and black workers and Chicanos and every other fucking kind of worker in the United States who was in the vanguard being led by the Communist Party, they went where the Communist Party led them. That's my view of that. But like you say, there's different ways to look at these things. I just think that Jay Sake's way of looking at it is not correct. I think that he's missing a whole lot of what was going on in the 1930s and what was going on in the American working class. Yeah. So the good thing is, we go back to what you were saying in the last portion of this, in this article, which is that the entire working class, forget ethnicity, forget color, forget all those those liberal political identity garbage that is used to divide us. Look to what unites us. The entire working class is going through, and has been going through for the last 40 years, a real brutal form of being knocked down, being knocked into the gutter, being kicked in the teeth when we're down, and we're starting to get tired of it. All of us. Now, where will that go? It could just go into useless eruptions like the last couple of months. Useless eruptions that don't really go anywhere, but that are exciting and that show potential, but they need leadership. We need a revolutionary political party, a real revolutionary political party, one that's non-electoral, non-parliamentary, one that focuses on organizing for revolution. That's my humble opinion. Any more comments on that before we move to our last topic?
You mentioned how part of why he has a narrow way of looking at the issue, you say, is because he's Maoist, and I can see what you're I can see what you're speaking to there, because a tendency I've seen among these people who identify as Maoists is to somewhat oversimplify it and be idealist. It's no wonder why a lot of these Maoists vilify the Communist Party of China simply for following Lenin's new economic policy. And apparently Sake himself is anti-China for this reason, which as I found out this information, it's made me certainly approach settlers with a grain of salt, because I don't know how much of it I should take as right. I guess you should apply this to any type of media or theory you read. You shouldn't take anything as gospel truth totally unquestioningly.
Yeah, question. Like RT says, question more. That's their slogan. I wasn't meaning in that direction. I've noticed some of that too among some Maoists, but I've known real smart, savvy Maoists too, who are really good at applying Marxism, Leninism, and dialectical materialism and historical materialism. That wasn't what I was getting at. What I was getting at is that the Popular Front in China, the way it was carried out in China after the liberation in 1949, was in a coalition government, which they still have today. They have a Popular Front government, and it includes several bourgeois political parties. The Democratic Party. It includes even the left wing of the Kuomintang that ended up staying in China. It might surprise you to find out they are part of the Chinese Communist government. They have a Popular Front government, and Mao and Maoism always supported everything that Stalin did, but particularly they supported the Popular Front because it worked out well for them, because all these tiny little dipshit nothing bourgeois political parties in China, they were always dipshit tiny parties. They went into a coalition with this gigantic, the biggest party on the face of the earth, and they are the government. They're the government. My friend Steve, I've told you about, who lives in Wuhan. He works in this government laboratory, basically. And one of his coworkers is a member of the Democratic Party, which is a liberal party. It's a bourgeois party. And his party is part of the ruling party of China. I mean, part of the ruling coalition of China. So, yeah, Maoists will, think the Popular Front's like cherry pie, or apple pie, good. But in the American context, in my opinion, the Popular Front has been an utter disaster, which has led to the demise of most of the left. Some of it's still out there, but they're useless because they're part of the Democrat Party. They're really like rump groups of the Democrat Party. The DSA and the Communist Party USA are cheerleaders for the Democrat Party. That's all they are. These are not real these are not real socialist parties. They're not real, in the case of the Communist Party USA, they're not a real Marxist-Leninist party. They're not a real communist party. So, different experiences. That's why you need socialism with Chinese characteristics, because they have their own experience. We've got to respect their experiences. We've got to respect that it works for them. And they need to respect, and I believe they do, our experiences and what works for us. And Popular Front has not worked for us. It has worked against us. Anyway, yeah. we got less than 10 minutes. That's really unfortunate, but I'm going to try to rush through this last thing. The CIA sponsored Congress for Cultural Freedom and the birth of the New Left. Now, I've just prepared a few things to start us off with here. Why was the CIA interested in sponsoring the birth of the New Left? And people might be surprised. CIA, New Left? That doesn't make any sense. Well, it does when you study the Congress for Cultural Freedom. It was first created out of a conference in Berlin in 1950. The consequences of the favorite slogan of the CIA-sponsored Congress for Cultural Freedom. The slogan was the end of ideology. The Congress for Cultural Freedom, that was their favorite slogan that they put out all over the place. The end of ideology. Think about that for a little while. Meaning the end of such important overarching worldviews as Marxism, Marxism-Leninism, and even scientific method. The real culmination of the slogan and the ideas behind it was the birth of postmodernism. That is the idea that there is no truth, no certainty, no objective reality. It is the ultimate anti-materialist, anti-science idea that ends with the despotic, liberal, fascist nightmare of Trump, Biden, and Harris. The end of ideology also led to the incredibly harmful ideas of Herbert Marcuse. Marcuse, and he was a big deal when I was a kid. Everybody had to read Marcuse, but Marcuse, a founder of the Frankfurt School of Postmodernists, they called themselves Marxians. Postmodernist left intellectuals became widely influential in the New Left. In the early 50s, he relocated from Europe to the United States, to the East Coast, and in the 60s settled down in San Diego to teach at UC San Diego. He was especially influential among American new leftists, teaching such dangerous ideas as the idea that the working class was not the revolutionary class, and that revolution would be carried out by other declassed forces such as students. The CIA, by disarming the left of its most essential and crucial ideas, like the idea that the working class would lead the socialist revolution and that the teaching ideology to the working class was essential to any successful revolution, effectively disarmed the left. And that's the reason the left, which was once a vibrant movement in the West and even in America, is now nothing more than a decayed, diseased body withering away. To solve the existential problems we face today, problems that threaten to destroy all humanity, we must begin the process of decimating the end of ideology. CIA-sponsored thesis and promote widely successful ideology of Marxism-Leninism. Now, with those opening remarks, I just want to make a couple other observations. I'm sure that every liberal who ever heard what I just said will say, CIA, Congress of Cultural Freedom. Now, the Congress of Cultural Freedom included an incredible number of the limelights of literary America and Europe of the 1940s, 50s, 60s. It's like a who's who of literary lights during that period of time. And the CIA deliberately created this group, created the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and funded it surreptitiously through, funneling the money through third parties and so forth, deliberately, because they thought this was a pretty sneaky way. We will recruit the leftist literary figures, the writers and the thinkers and so forth, the actors in some cases. We will recruit them and then have them subtly, surreptitiously start to turn people away from Marxism-Leninism, which was their real threat. Every liberal who hears what I just said and what I've just been saying, they'll say, "Oh, you're a fucking conspiracy nut, a conspiracy theorist." Well, no, as it happens, this is all documented. A 1966 series in the New York Times exposed the fact that the CIA created and funded for many, many years the Congress of Cultural Freedom. And they did it deliberately because they thought this was the best way they could think of in the 1950s of undermining Marxism-Leninism around the world, undermining what they call communism, to further verify that this was totally a CIA creation, we have in 1972, the former immediate past CIA director of covert intelligence admitted in a public interview, that yes, the CIA had created the Congress of Cultural Freedom. It's, I could go through and read you the list of people who were in this group. It's quite incredible. But I think I'm just going to refrain from that because we've only got like 5 minutes left. So I want to give you a chance to respond to this if you want to, Rainer.
I try to see the results of this in the modern discourse on the left, and I can think of some examples, like the idea that geopolitics doesn't matter, that we shouldn't think about these underlying international conflicts and rivalries when we think about issues like Hong Kong or Thailand or Belarus or Lebanon or Syria. There's another example of how the radical left in this country has been co-opted towards voicing support for groups when they're not necessarily anti-imperialist, when they might even be unintentionally supporting groups that are working in favor of the U.S. NATO empire. So there's we can see this postmodernist garbage in things like this, where the truth doesn't really matter. A materialist analysis doesn't really matter, and we can certainly see how a lot of these a lot of anarchists get roped into this kind of thinking, because anarchism anarchism itself discounts the necessity of creating a worker state in transitioning from capitalism to socialism to communism, and it mutates into online cliques that do things like call people with a materialist analysis tankies, or silly stuff like this.
Yeah. Best thing to do in that case is just tell them, I'm a proud tanky. Fuck you. And we'll roll our tanks right in on you. But anyway, yes, well put. Okay, anything else?
No.
Any other observations before we retire? I guess that's it. Thank you very much, Rainer, for bringing what you bring to our discussion, which is so much, so valuable. And thank you to all of our listeners, all of our watchers now that we've gone into the modern video age. And we'll be back again next week. So until then, hasta la vista, Rainer. Hasta la vista, people.
Bye.